In this video we're going to have a look at how the physical attributes of the property might lend itself to one type of hazard, and that being fire. Now fire and bushfires in Australia, obviously whether they occur naturally or by human action, have shaped many of our landscapes, and you guys looked at the case study of the Black Saturday bushfires. There's many factors that contribute to bushfire hazard, those being the weather, obviously those short-term trends in the atmosphere, so you're looking for no precipitation, very high levels of temperature, high wind speed and low levels of humidity to create the perfect fire storm. Now let's look at this property. So we know that the property itself is located in a valley and it borders a national park, and you can see that this national park to the north here is heavily forested. If a fire were to break out in that area, do you think that this property might be at risk of fire? That's a question you need to ask yourself. There's also something else that can affect fire, and that's a relief. Relief refers to the amount of elevation. Slope and aspect come into it as well. So in terms of a fire activity, a fire will move much faster uphill than it will downhill. So if a fire breaks out in the national park, what sort of measures need to be taken to protect people, landscapes and property at this location? Who would they contact? Where would they go? What would they do? Could they do anything? These are the sorts of questions you need to consider. Now that's for the example of a large bushfire. But what about a small grass fire? And Sophie was telling me when I visited this property that her husband Jed was out slashing in the paddocks one area. Now this of course doesn't seem too dangerous, but he struck a rock which obviously created a spark and then led to a grass fire. They had to quickly come up with some ideas on how to put this out or how to lessen the impact of this fire. The short story was that they rang the rural fire service, and the fire service came and put out the fire, and it was not until there was significant damage to many of the paddocks that the fire stopped. So fire is a significant risk to this property because of its location and obviously the amount of bush that surrounds it. Now if we zoom into the human characteristics of the property, so obviously the house and the other areas, we can see that there is this bit of a vegetation buffer. This light green colour is obviously your cleared paddocks, whereas obviously in the north sector of the property it's heavily forested. Now it's also quite hilly, and as I said before, this can have an impact upon the speed at which a fire can spread. So have a look at this property. Is it at risk of fire? Well, I'll let you be the judge of that, but I certainly think it is. Now, as I said before, there's different things that can determine the ferocity and, I guess, risk of fire taking out certain aspects of this property and putting people in danger. And that is obviously determined by climate and weather. So if we look at this climate graph, we can see rainfall as represented by the blue columns here in here. So in the month of January, February, March, we can see that they receive quite a bit of rainfall. So do you think that this time of year would be especially risky for fires? There's been a lot of rainfall. Does that have any impact upon the risk of fires? So if not that time of year, when do you think might there be more of a risk of fire activity? Well, although the temperatures are lower, there's less rainfall around August, July, August, September. Then, as the temperatures rise once more, you'll get a lot of growth of grass and of shrubs in this time period. So maybe these are the months that bushfire risk is greatest. So let's look at this example of bushfire risk for the property. This is the planning portal as provided to us by the New South Wales Government. It's a form of geographic information system, and it shows all sorts of data. It overlays it in a spatial manner. We can see here the property laid out and its location. We can see how much the property is actually heavily forested. Quite a significant amount. Now, with the planning portal, we can see areas that are at risk of fire. Those areas at greatest risk of fire, vegetation category 1, identified in red. And there's a clear relationship between those heavily forested areas and where red colours are. And I'd suggest that these are areas of greatest risk of bushfires. Not so much man-made fires, maybe through accident like I mentioned before, but maybe a bushfire starts by a lightning strike and spreads throughout the property. So those areas in yellow are those buffer zones where there might be small amounts of trees and shrubs. The areas not shaded are obviously clear. So how can this inform your planning for your disaster management plan? Identifying areas of greatest risk of fire and those with less risk of fire. Use this and other sources of information to think about and plan for fire risk and hazard and how you can protect people, property and landscapes at this location.